Shabbat Shalom. I have missed you, and it is good to be with you again after a 3-month sabbatical. Like the sabbatical that's described in our Torah, the Shemitah year, when the land is supposed to lie fallow every 7 years so that the nutrients in the soil can regenerate, so that it can be more productive and more fertile. I am feeling restored and re-energized after this time spent mostly with family and friends that I love and I don't get to see as much as I wish I could. And it really has been a gift. I am boundlessly grateful to my amazing colleagues who took care of the congregation as they always do, but even more so these last 3 months. And I'm grateful to Temple leadership for gifting me this time to restore. I was mostly successful in keeping my distance from the place. Those of you who were here Erev Purim, did you notice an enormous, inflatable, upside-down clown with someone hidden inside? That was fun. That was fun. So now that was Purim, and now here we are preparing for Pesach. What happens at one Seder table likely happens at other Seder tables too. There is the spilled Manischewitz on the pristine white tablecloth. There is the child who has a meltdown. Not Rafi, I know. But when it comes time for Manish Chana, all that pressure can be too much. There's the elder who falls asleep at the table because brisket and 4 cups of wine is also just too much. And we've all witnessed versions of these similar scenes at our Seders over the years. So I imagine my in-laws' Seder table in Connecticut is not the only one with a missing zroa. One year, not that long ago, the table was set beautifully. The shank bone had been carefully acquired by my mother-in-law, who knows at this time of year you have to ask the butcher to go in the back to bring out the shank bone that's set aside for Jewish customers. At this season, when so many Christians are preparing lamb for their Easter dinners, usually the butchers know to keep a shank bone for the Jewish customers. So my mother-in-law roasted it according to tradition, placed it in its designated circle on the Seder plate, and then set the Seder plate down at the center of the table. But when the guests arrived and we all took our places around the table for candle lighting, my mother-in-law gasped because she noticed that the shank bone was missing. The rest of the table was exactly as she had prepared it, but the zroa was gone. We could not begin the Seder without it. It's an essential ritual object, and I'm going to speak about that. And so the search began, not for the afikomen, but for the missing zroa. And it didn't take long. We heard my sister-in-law shouting from the family room, "Bad dog! Bad dog!" Her enormous dog was driven so mad by the smell of the roasted bone that somehow she managed to climb up onto the table, snatch the zroa without disturbing any of the crystal or silver or china. So it's this symbol of the zroa that I'd like to speak about. It is a remnant of a tradition that is long ago and far away for the Jewish people. It is a remnant of the sacrificial system. This morning, we studied at Torah study, Shabbat Vayikra. We turned to the book of Leviticus to begin the endless laws and practices of this ancient world of the sacrificial system. At the Seder table, other symbols are lifted and explained. The Haggadah says we should lift up the matzah. We should raise up the maror. We should make sure that not only everyone can see them, but can also taste them. But not the zroa, not the shank bone. That just sits on the Seder plate. We do not raise it. We certainly do not eat it, God forbid. We don't even touch it. Some Haggadot say we can point to it from a distance. Others say we shouldn't even point to it. So what is this mystery of the Zroa? It's surprising that we have such a distance from it at the Seder, because the Zroa is the symbol of Pesach. It is the Pesach. The entire festival is called Pesach because of the roasted lamb that was called Pesach. Rabban Gamliel said that the holiday is not complete. You have not fulfilled your Pesach obligations if you do not explain Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Rabban Gamliel was the first century head of the Sanhedrin when the land of Israel was under the brutal control of the Romans, when Christianity was just taking shape. And he said, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu ba'Pesach. Whoever does not speak of these three things on Pesach, lo yatsa yedei chovato. You have not fulfilled your obligation. These three symbols are the whole point of the Seder, and you will have missed the point of the holiday if you don't describe these three things. Ve'elu hein, and here they are, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Pesach, al shuma. Rabban Gamliel's question is recorded in virtually every Haggadah. He asks, Pesach, why did our ancestors eat the Pesach sacrifice even at the time when the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem? That is, the original Pesach meal was eaten on the last night in Egypt, in haste as we were preparing for freedom. Shouldn't that be remembered as a singular event? Shouldn't that Pesach meal be once and for all? That was a singular moment in our history when we risked everything for a shot at freedom, when we held a massive demonstration before Pharaoh and all the Egyptians to see that we refused to be despised, we refused to be enslaved, that we would instead choose dignity and self-worth, with our heads held high, or in the language of the Torah, with our loins girded and with our staff in our hands, we would walk out on that suffering. We were ready to be on the move, to be on the march. And so Rabban Gamliel asks, none of this makes sense for an era when we are back in our ancestral homeland, when the grandeur of the temple is ours to enjoy. We're no longer forced to build cities for Pharaoh. We built a temple for God here and for ourselves in Jerusalem. So why should we imitate that first Pesach sacrifice of Egypt? And he answers his own question, as the rabbis often do. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be God, passed over the houses of our ancestors in Egypt, as it is written, you shall say, Zevach Pesach hu ladonai. The Passover offering is for God, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt. While plaguing Egypt, God kept our houses safe. These exact words are lifted and placed into the Haggadah. It's a surprising answer, actually. The Pesach offering represents the actual moment of God's intervention. And that's what we have to recall when our eyes fall on the Zroa. The ritual was not just once and for all time. On that night of watch in Egypt, it comes every year, and maybe even every day, to teach us that the Exodus, that all forms of freedom come only because of God's direct hand in human history. That God, through us, still shapes and moves history along. The Zroa is first and foremost about faith in divine compassion and power, God's ability to rescue and redeem. The Pesach offering stands for two kinds of freedom. First, spiritual freedom. Against the backdrop of Egyptian idol worship, our ancestors remembered the one God of all creation, and gave sacrifice to draw near to God. The blood of the Pesach lamb on that first night represents physical freedom that was won for our ancestors when the firstborns of Egypt were struck down and the homes of the Hebrews were untouched, protected by the lamb's blood on the lintels. If you think of the three symbols, Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, we might say, Matzah, that's something we make with our own hands. Maror, that's a bitterness that is inflicted upon us by human enemies. But the Pesach, the Zroah, reminds us that redemption came through God's hand. As it is written in the Torah, Beyad chazakah uvizroa netuyah, with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm, God took us out from there. One Reform Haggadah in our Reform Jewish tradition, which celebrates the partnership between God and humanity, it is written, should enemies again rise against us, the Pesach, the remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt, will never fail to inspire us with new courage and strengthen our faith in God. So that little shank bone, or some use a roasted chicken bone, or vegetarians use a roasted beet, whatever is on your Seder plate, it should be triggering memories of 3,500 years of Jewish experience. Struggle and triumph. Yes, it reminds us of the days when the temple stood, when the Kohanim and the Leviim and pilgrims from throughout the land of Israel and beyond its borders would place their perfect lambs on the altar according to precise instruction and share a feast with one another to enact an even more ancient ritual, that very first Pesach offering, when we were still slaves just waking up from 430 years of suffering, when our eyes were opened and our hearts were open to the possibility of freedom that would come through faith in God's power to redeem and faith in ourselves to create courageously and creatively step out into something unknown and new. In Torah study this morning, we were talking about how much of the book of Leviticus seems strange, so foreign and far off that we cannot relate. Martin Buber, the great biblical scholar of the 20th century, says this about his envy for our ancestors who could bring sacrifice. He writes, "Two great servants move through the ages, prayer and sacrifice. In prayer, man pours himself out, dependent, without reservation, knowing that incomprehensibly he acts on God, albeit without exacting anything from God. And those who sacrifice, what of them? I cannot despise the honest servants of the remote past who, through that God desired the smell of their burnt sacrifices, they knew in a foolish and vigorous way that one can and should give to God. And that is also known to him who offers his little will to God and encounters God in a great will, a greater will. Let your will be done is all he says. But truth goes on to say for him, through me, whom you, O God, need. Let your will be done is all he says through his sacrifice, but truth goes on to say for him and on his behalf, on her behalf, through me, whom you, O God, need. This brings me to the leadership of our congregation, who are honored and celebrated this day. I want to add a personal note of admiration for Elliot Jacobson and Carol Sterling for your support for me in my rabbinate. And you know that the reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah. You have not done all that you have done looking for accolades. That's not what it's about. That's not how you're built. But today we want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to thank you. because we need to point to you to call attention to the sacrifices that you have made over the years through your leadership. Mitzvah by mitzvah, you are walking in God's ways, bringing redemption to this world. Only you and the all-knowing God know everything that you have done and continue to do. Your families know much of it. Your congregation knows much of it. The URJ knows much of it. But we know that the reason you do it, that is well known far and wide. It's for the sake of the mitzvah itself, to be partners with the Redeemer of all. I want to share one interesting midrashic debate that I came across in preparation for today. In the Mechilta, it goes like this. Where was the blood of that first Pesach placed? Was it on the inside of the houses or on the outside of the houses? What do you think? You think the outside. I think most of us picture it on the outside. But it actually, you think so?
You don't want to broadcast it.
Okay, so you think on the inside because we might be fearful to broadcast this is a Jewish home with Jews living inside. So interesting. The Torah actually doesn't say. It says we put blood on the lintel of the house. But it doesn't say inside or outside. So the rabbis are curious and they ask. The angel of death would have known, right? God sent, the angel of death would have known. The angel of death did not need to know which houses were marked with the blood and which were not. So Rabbi Yitzchak agrees that the blood was applied on the outside of the houses, but not for the sake of the angel of death, because God would have sent the angel with a clear mission, and a physical sign would not be required. Instead, Rabbi Yitzchak believes the blood of the Pesach was put on the outside of the houses so that the Egyptians would see it and be horrified. Because you see, lambs were worshipped in pagan Egypt. So by slaughtering the lamb and taking its blood, it was an act of rebellion. And the Egyptians would have understood it. We are feasting on your gods tonight. This was a radical and bold move. On the other hand, there was Rabbi Natan. He imagines that the blood of the Pesach lamb was applied on the inside of the houses. The Torah doesn't specify, so this is fair game. How does he come to this belief? It is written, and the blood on the houses where you are staying shall be a sign for you, for your sake, a sign for you and not for anyone else. This divergence of opinion can be easily harmonized. The blood of the Pesach lamb was an external sign, a clear message to the Egyptians that they and their idolatrous ways were soundly rejected and that the Israelites would be slaves no more. And it was also an internal sign, preparing us psychologically and spiritually for the difficulties to come throughout our wilderness wanderings. Until we reached Eretz Yisrael, we would have to learn how to put our trust in God. Good people, I believe we are just at the beginning of a time that will require self-sacrifice. God only knows how the democracies of our world will weather this storm. God only knows how long the Jewish people and the Jewish state will have to struggle for our dignity, for the peace we pray for the quiet we dream of. Something is being asked of each of us right now. Something of the spirit and something of our physical self too. I believe this is a question that brings us together each Shabbat and will bring us together many times throughout Pesach. We ask, what role am I to play in this moment of my people's story? How can I move our world to fulfill the promises and the purposes of the freedoms that we do still enjoy? Rabbi Avraham Yoshua Heschel of Apt, the grandfather of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, teaches this, and this is where I'll conclude. Do not limit the form in which you wish to serve God. Be what the moment calls for. Be like a vessel into which anything can be poured: wine, milk, or water. How will each of us set the length of our days on the altar of service now? When we see the zroa on our Seder table, whether we point to it or not, how will we be reminded of God's might? And how will we use our own mighty hands, our own outstretched arms, to embrace one another and to embrace this moment which demands of us service and sacrifice, devotion and dedication of all kinds? How do we make the prayer of redemption more and more true? Tzur Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael. Rock of Israel, come to our help. Fulfill your promise, for you are the Redeemer. Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Praised are you, Adonai, who redeemed Israel then. Praised are you, Adonai, who calls upon us to walk in your ways now, so that we can bring this world to greater redemption. Amen.